Chapter 2. The Enigma of Arrival. How callous. I just abandoned her. Perhaps this is why she still haunts me. Kate Zambrino, Book of Mutter. In prison with plenty of time for contemplation, my arrest seemed unavoidable and inevitable. As I tried to pinpoint the moment that set it in motion, I returned to the day when in the 14th year of my life, coming home from school, I passed the familiar group of pensioners, cracking sunflower seeds at the entrance to our building, climbed 3 flights of stairs to our landing, turned a key in the lock, and to my surprise discovered that our Pekingese, Misha, wasn't waiting for me at the door. He had a bellicose personality and peed over any fresh scent of urine, including his own. "Where's Misha?" I asked my mother upon entering our kitchen. She was standing wrapped in her bathrobe, holding a cigarette in her left hand, with the right sautéing onions with a big wooden spoon. "He lost an eye in a fight with a stray," she said, drawing deeply on her cigarette. "I paid Volodya, our building superintendent, 5 rubles to put him out of his misery. He buried him by the river." From then on, every time I remembered the dog, I had this terrible image of him squeaking inside a burlap bag where he was getting suffocated by Volodya's strong hands. This event marked the beginning of our family breaking apart. A few months later, my father divorced my mother, and having agreed to pay our expenses until I turned 18, moved to Moscow. I presumed I would be caring for my mother afterward because my mother never had a job and hadn't, in fact, gone to college or trade school. In Moscow, my father met a woman 10 years his junior and remarried. Unlike in Kiev, where he worked as an engineer and supplemented his income trading in pre-revolutionary art, in Moscow, he transitioned into a full-time art dealer, found a way to export objects of art to Western Europe, and became well off. After he divorced my mother, I saw him infrequently, only during summer school break, when I visited him in Moscow, or when he took an overnight train to Kiev, where, after he picked me up, we would visit the local art dealers. I always enjoyed watching him bargain. If he was offered an object he liked, he would call the price absurd, lose his temper, appeal to the dealer's better nature, ridicule him, threaten never to cross the threshold of the dealer's home, sigh, shrug his shoulders, admonish, and when he finally won his price, shake his head sadly as if he was accepting defeat. His new occupation consumed him, like opium consumes drug users. His favorite topic of conversation became art history. For companions, he preferred other art dealers. And for leisure, he turned over pages of auction catalogs, studying hammer prices. Our relationship, never close, became even more distant. My mother, when young, was so beautiful. She had prominent cheekbones, a small, firm mouth, bright blue eyes, and a broad forehead. She had always loved clothes and had my father buy her the latest fashions. Wherever she went, men looked at her. Sometimes, though, they looked at her in a way that bothered me, and I wondered if this had something to do with her dress, and wished it was a little bit looser. After my father left, she became overtaken with the sense of loss, even though she hardly ever spoke warmly about him. Initially, she retained some of her optimism and began to date one man, and then another. But after these men proved abusive and the relationships unsuccessful, she crumbled. Our apartment, always immaculately clean, now had dust settled under hard-to-get places. Instead of eating, she began to push food around her plate, using sleeping pills as antidepressants, and as time progressed, retreated more and more often into her bed. Some weeks I would stay in our kitchen doing homework. The sun would cycle in one window and out the other, and she would still be in bed. Steadily, she lost interest in how I was doing at school, where or with whom I spent time after school, and what my plans were for the future. Unlike most teenagers who want to learn from their parents and be with them, I was pulled away from my parents by a distant and mysterious force. Inside my mother's bookcase, among books on loss, melancholy, and broken love, I discovered a hardbound edition of Jack London's stories about Alaska. In these stories, I found a country with entrepreneurial people who valued individual freedom, and in whose utterances I heard a call of the wild to the far, far west. But not at first as far as Alaska. 2 months after I turned 18, following an established immigration route through Western Europe, I landed in New York on a flight from Rome, together with around 300 Soviet Jews. Upon clearing through passport control and customs, I entered a large room where, behind the fence, constructed with 2 parallel railings, people were waiting for arrivals. One man, seeking an elderly woman next to me, leapt between the railings and rushed towards her with open arms. "Auntie, Auntie," he shouted with the excitement of a man who hadn't seen his aunt for many years. He was about to clasp her in a bear hug when another man, trailing right behind him, brushed him aside, saying, "Watch out, brute, this is my mother." Everyone from our plane, other than myself and a middle-aged couple, both of them doctors, were greeted by relatives and friends. They were embraces, kisses, and stalled luggage carts all around me. Some faces brought to mind the iconic image of Columbus and his seamen after crossing the ocean on their first voyage. They had tears of thanksgiving. Myself and the couple were the only ones greeted by a stranger bearing placards with their names. Blond, in his 50s, with boyish pink cheeks, he introduced himself as a representative from Nyan, the Jewish social agency that was going to assist us with money for housing and food at the very beginning of our lives in the United States. In the parking lot, the air was thick with jet fumes. After we climbed inside the man's van, he purred the engine to life, switched into gear, and pulled onto the expressway where we found ourselves snared in traffic. To my right and left, there were ugly gray and brown apartment buildings. Along the way, over on the other side of the expressway, there was an abandoned car. The wheels were gone and the hood was up. It seemed completely out of place, yet a part of the landscape. Then the Manhattan skyline appeared, and we traversed a bridge from where I saw on the island beneath a tall, monolithic monstrosity with barred windows. "What is that?" I asked the representative from Nyan. "A hospital for crazy people. Cuckoo." He twirled a finger at his temple, making sure I understood. I had never seen a mental hospital back home because the government wanted to create the appearance that socialism provided happiness to everyone and mental hospitals were hidden from view. Dread overtook me as I imagined the unfortunate people inside, and the thrill of a new beginning disappeared like the tail end of a dream. After leaving the bridge, we made a left turn onto a long and wide avenue, and then another left onto a street with decrepit apartment buildings where we pulled over next to a squat hotel with bleary windows. On its front step, 2 men in shorts were passing a bottle. At the reception desk, a grossly overweight clerk sat among keys with large paddles and a silent telephone. Upon seeing our driver, he presented him with a register to sign, and I realized they had done business before. On my floor behind one of the doors, a bed creaked rhythmically. My room had oatmeal carpeting and oatmeal color curtains, and the smell of long extinguished cigarettes. In the bathroom, on the ceiling, a smoke alarm flickered red and beeped nonstop. "Alarm does not work," I told the overweight clerk downstairs. He said something about tomorrow. "I pay," I said. "You'll pay?" He pointed his fat fingers at me and began to laugh so hard that the rolls of the flab on his stomach began to jiggle. "This man is mocking me," I told myself. "Apparently he thinks if I had any money, I wouldn't be staying in this shithole." Instead of returning to my room, where I would have to deal with the beeping smoke alarm, I decided to take in the city I was about to call home. What did I know about New York? Only a few screenshots from the black and white movie Midnight Cowboy with Dustin Hoffman. It was evening. Darkness was enveloping the sky. Shop owners were rolling down shutters, and the streets were getting chased. Whoever remained on the streets forged ahead in long, purposeful steps. I followed the pedestrians, but found along the way only imperious skyscrapers, apartment buildings with names, and trees anchored in concrete. About an hour and a half later, I reached the tip of Manhattan, where, through a fog, I saw the Statue of Liberty. A man walking towards me had his hand in his pockets and a look on his face that told me he was trying to discern me. He made me feel unsafe. I turned around and, with a quickened pace, headed back to the hotel. When I entered my room, I discovered that the clerk had mercy on me and the alarm had been fixed. The next day, at 9, I was met by a counselor, a Russian woman with dark hair tied up in a ponytail. She handed me 6 crispy $100 bills, a New York City subway map, and a list of residences for rent in Brooklyn, and instructed me to take the Q train to Brighton Beach Avenue, which, according to the map, ran parallel to the shore 2 blocks away. I heard about Brighton Beach from the soulful compositions by Russian-American songwriters whose music made its way into the Soviet Union. I emerged from Nyon into a busy rush hour and a few minutes later descended into the subway where I came upon a scene I had encountered before only in Dickens' Oliver Twist. People dressed in rags, their hair unwashed and matted, were aimlessly walking around or lying on disintegrating cardboard boxes. One man, wrapped in a decaying blanket, used a piece of cardboard to compose a message. It said he was homeless and hungry. Next to him lay a hat with a few shiny coins. When the Q train thundered into the station, its doors opened with a deep, tired sigh. I got on, grabbed a stainless steel pole, and settled my eyes on the backlit advertisements whose meanings I couldn't decipher. The train proceeded through a dark, claustrophobic tunnel from where it sprang into sunlight somewhere in Brooklyn. To my right and left, there were walls safeguarding the tracks, tagged in huge swirls of fat and ugly graffiti. Then the tracks rose above ground, and I saw streets lined with 2- and 3-story houses constructed with bricks weathered to the color of mud. Some houses shared a common wall as if they were conjoined twins. After several stops with passengers coming and going, the train screeched around the bend, a pre-recorded voice bawled, "Brighton Beach Avenue," and we pulled onto a platform held up in the air by metal stilts. For a moment, I seemed to have returned to the Soviet Union. Into the frame of the train window rolled a Slavic-looking woman in a floral robe, smoking a cigarette inside her kitchen. Her shoulders were slumped in the same resignation that I had observed in many women back home. Beneath the subway tracks, street vendors were hawking nesting dolls, brightly polished Samars, and hardbound editions of Chekhov, Tolstoy, Turgenev, and other Russian classics. Every other storefront breathed shish kebabs, piroshki, borscht, or some other fragrant food, making me incredibly hungry. And from every corner, beyond a boardwalk that rose above people's heads, I could see glimpses of pale blue ocean. "I have a good place for you," said one of the short, fat Russian landlord with proportionately short and fat arms when I showed up at his office. The good place was above the hair salon, 4 blocks past the bend in the subway tracks. In the section of Brighton Beach Avenue, the buildings were mostly residential and the sidewalk more orderly. To enter it, I had to climb after the landlord up the tilted staircase. Inside, there was a hallway that doubled as a kitchen with a fridge, a sink, and a 2-burner stove. An open door to my right revealed a little shack with a shower and a pull-chain toilet. The second door, also to my right, was secured with a large, conspicuous padlock. The end of the hallway opened onto a pale green room with only a shiny burgundy mattress that still had the smell of another human. The window in the room, crisscrossed by a fire escape, had a view of the building opposite, 6 stories high. "The room is $204 a month, plus a 1-month deposit. I will give you the mattress for free," the landlord said matter-of-factly. The price was right, or rather, it was the only possible price, because not having a job, I was afraid to spend more. And I couldn't hope to find anything cheaper, because cheaper meant worse, and this seemed as bad as of an accommodation as I could possibly imagine. Without further ado, I inhaled my lungs full of air, a habit I acquired in childhood whenever faced with a difficulty, handed over the money, and became the room's new occupant. On my way back to the hotel, passing by a newsstand on Brighton Beach Avenue, I caught a glimpse of a newspaper in Russian, priced at 50 cents. The proprietor was a bearded man whose turban made him look as wise as a guru. I reached into my pocket and deposited into his outstretched hand 2 quarters. In the train car, I sat by the window and while the streets were rushing past me, began thumbing through the paper's pages. One page had a photograph and a report of a catastrophe that had occurred at an air show. It showed a burning plane that had crashed close to a crowd of onlookers who were fleeing in all directions. In Ukraine, to promote the illusion that socialism implied stability, information about accidents or any other unpredictable or traumatic events were kept out of the news. This photograph left a novel and discomforting feeling that life could be upended at any moment. Thumbing further, I came to a classified advertisement with a somewhat concealed message whose amusing words ameliorated my mood. 1975 model, milky white, everything original, $150 an hour, alcohol only. Anna 718-. I skipped to help wanted, but the only ads there were for nannies, cooks, and one for a ballet instructor. That night, after collecting my luggage at the hotel and returning back to my apartment, I lay awake on the mattress for a long time, listening to the hum of nearing and receding cars, a burst of laughter from a woman having a conversation with someone beneath my window, the far-off howling of a dog, the sharp sound of a motorcycle. When at last I fell asleep, I slept uneasily, dreaming about the picture of the burning plane and waking periodically to the unfamiliar darkness. In the morning, the sound of shutters rising above the hair salon told me that it was time to set out in search of a job. Having taken a year of English in high school, I memorized only about 200 words. Not enough to have even a basic conversation. My best chance to find a job, I reasoned, was at a Russian-speaking establishment. I started at Siberian Dumplings on the corner of Brighton Beach Avenue and Ocean Parkway. There I was met by a man clad in black crustacean garb with daggers for pockets. His glassy stare made me tongue-tied, and I pretended to have walked into the wrong door. I next entered a butcher shop where an assortment of ribs and limbs and shoulders hung from hooks in the window. The sharp smell of blood coming from the cuts made me a little nauseous. Behind a counter filled with a mountain of chickens stood a muscular butcher wearing a white apron. He had a distinct Russian face, and when I asked him for a job, he pointed towards his assistant, who was carving a pig, and told me that the only job he had was already taken. Undaunted, I crossed the street to the next block, where I saw people fingering fruit at the sidewalk stall. Beside the stall, there was a 2-story building with a red neon sign that said Restaurant Moscow. Inside, a staircase lined with pictures of celebrities led me to the second floor, where I was met by a plump woman in a blue suit with oversized lapels, whom I presumed to be the manager. Before I even had a chance to open my mouth, she must have realized by the style of my clothes and my uncertain demeanor that I was a newly arrived immigrant looking for a job. "Another one?" she said in an expression of annoyance and rolled her eyes. And at the Black Sea bookstore and all the other Russian establishments, I was faced with either a cold refusal or a contemptuous smile. Apparently, the collapsing Soviet economy had unleashed a flood of immigrants these businesses were not able to absorb. Having exhausted my options on Brighton Beach, I crossed over to Neptune Avenue, which was flanked on one side by a canal with boats in the middle and on the other by small businesses. None of these businesses appeared Russian-owned, and the more I walked, the more I began to fear the prospect of not finding a job. At one point, I came to a Chinese restaurant. The owner was likely an immigrant, I thought, and might feel sympathetic towards me and agree to give me a job. A plastic cat in the window, moving its paw up and down, looked like it was waving me away. Standing there, I lost whatever confidence I had and decided to continue walking. Then I saw a footbridge, where a man with a fishing rod was watching a bobber, and past the footbridge, facing the canal, there was a restaurant named Paradise. Though the name wasn't Russian, it had a certain kitsch that was sure to resonate with people who had experienced food shortages behind the Iron Curtain. After hesitating a moment, I pulled open the door handle. Inside was an open space room with a chandelier shimmering huge, quivering drops of light over the dance floor. In the far corner to my right was a stage with a drum set, 2 guitars, and a microphone. Rectangular tables draped in white cloth filled the floor. The absence of customers suggested this was a nightclub. A dwarf-sized man in a green suit with a silver tinge, like the back of a dollar bill, materialized behind the kitchen doors. His open-neck shirt revealed a tip of the Star of David on a chain as fat as on a bathtub plug. Everything about him spoke for his fondness for money. "Good afternoon," I said in Russian, and saw a sign of recognition in his eyes. "I'm looking for a job." The words rolled out dry, as if I was asking for something inappropriate. "The only opening I have is for a busboy on the weekends." "What do you pay?" $50 a shift. Then he added, "Cash." "All right, when can I start?" "Come Friday at 5 o'clock. Make sure you're dressed in a white shirt, black pants, and shoes." He looked contemptuously at my Adidas sneakers. Every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, from 5 in the evening until around 4 in the morning, I folded napkins, polished cutlery, positioned it with precision around the tables, changed dirty plates and ashtrays for clean ones, all to the sound of music, the rhythm of the wiggling hips, and occasional cries of l'chaim. The next few months were an endless battle to have enough money for food. The pangs of hunger were at times so acute that I, not being a smoker, would ask strangers in the street for a cigarette to supplant hunger with dizziness and nausea. And when the dizziness and nausea weren't enough to calm these pangs, I sauntered the streets of Manhattan Beach, a wealthy neighborhood adjacent to Brighton Beach, where I would distract myself by appreciating the facades of houses. That winter, I didn't have enough money to cover my electric bill and had the electricity cut off. The cold in my apartment was so relentless that it found its way into my dreams. I was climbing Mount Everest, a musher on Amundsen's expedition to the South Pole, and a store clerk stuck in a meat locker. I no longer nourished my hope to visit Alaska. The idea of being close to the Arctic Circle was intolerable. If I had to last through another winter in the same apartment, I vowed to drop it all and return home. Meanwhile, commonly overheard words and words accompanied by pictures and window displays began to take their meaning. Other words helped too. Words with Latin roots whose meaning I instantly recognized since they sounded familiar in Ukrainian or Russian. Pizza, address, nationality, hydrant, public, date. When my English slightly improved, I borrowed from the library A Movable Feast by Hemingway. My mother often talked about this book, and its title in Russian, "Life is a holiday that is always with you," seemed to enchant her. At first, I found reading the book to be an extremely difficult task. I had to turn to the dictionary for the meaning of so many words that when they reoccurred, I had forgotten their meaning and had to look them up again. Yet, little by little, I was turning to the dictionary less and less. In the first week of spring, the weather suddenly turned for the better. The sky was blue, the piles of snow gave way to wet, glistening surfaces, and birds began to chirp heavily on the electric wires. In the second week, the sun beamed, and it became apparent that the weather would hold. Then the third week arrived. The trees became tinged with new leaves, the grass protruded from the ground, and I, carrying a bin full of dirty plates at the restaurant, bumped into an acquaintance from Kiev. He was dressed in a black, chalk-striped suit over a crisp blue shirt and had grown a small paunch since the last time I saw him. The contrast between us made me ill at ease. "How are you?" I asked, setting the bin down on the empty table next to me. "I'm good," he said, rubbing his belly. "Have you been here long?" "About 2 years." "What do you do?" "I drive a cab." "Does it pay well?" "About $120 a shift." I made a rapid calculation. $120 times 6 days a week times 4 weeks a month. The number I saw would allow me to buy either 3,000 loaves of bread, 6 fancy suits, or 3 pairs of Italian shoes. Either way, it seemed like a lot. That week, I quit the restaurant and joined a brotherhood of cab drivers. With the first money I made, I rented a comfortable basement studio in a 2-story brownstone and decorated with a bed from IKEA, 2-drawer cabinets, a television, and a stereo system from Sharp. When a fellow taxi driver introduced me to a girl from Kharkiv, who was tall and slim and had red hair that reached all the way to her waist when she undid it, she became my girlfriend until 2 years later she moved to California. Driving a cab proved to be much harder than I anticipated. My shift was 12 hours long, and there were no breaks. Not being accustomed to sitting behind a wheel for long hours, I would feel so sore in my back that when I came home at times, I couldn't sleep. Then, one August afternoon, about 2 years into working as a cabbie, I was hailed at JFK Airport by a middle-aged man in a gray fedora hat with a thick brown ribbon. "I need a ride to Manhattan," he said after I loaded his luggage with a British Airways tag still on. On approach to Midtown Tunnel, a single flash of lightning was followed some milliseconds later by a clap of thunder, and then rain that hit the asphalt with so much force that the raindrops were bouncing back up. My visual field became reduced to 2 semicircles of glass swept by the windshield wipers. To my left, there were 3 lanes of traffic coming my way. To my right, a white and blue bus whizzed past, splashing highway water, and turned whatever was left of my visual field into distorted red and yellow flashes. A swipe of the wipers revealed a trailer truck standing still not more than 20 feet ahead. I slammed on the brakes and in slow motion felt the highway peeling out from under me until my taxi ended up within inches of the trunk's bumper. In my rear view, my passenger's face turned white. "You almost got us killed," I heard him say. "This wasn't my fault, sir." A few minutes later, we entered the tunnel, and I saw him looking at my name on the card in the frame of the dashboard. "Are you from Russia?" he asked, seemingly wanting to start a conversation and make up for disparaging me for no good reason. "Actually, I'm from the Ukraine." "How come you're driving a cab?" "I'm trying to save money to start a business." "What business do you have in mind, if you don't mind me asking?" "I haven't decided yet. Maybe a restaurant." "Can I give you a piece of advice?" "Sure." When I arrived here from Poland after the war, I went to college, became an architect, and now I own my own firm. In this country, if you want to be successful, you need a college degree. Go to college. It will open new possibilities for you. While going to college had been on my mind for some time, this man's words were so sincere that they gave me the extra encouragement I needed. That month, I enrolled for the fall semester at Baruch College, located in a tall, dignified structure on the southeast corner of Lexington Avenue and 23rd Street. I chose the degree in finance because I had a knack for numbers and because I believed I inherited my father's business acumen. My classes began in the evening after my shift driving a cab. By then, I was tired and absorbed little. When the semester was over, I received poor grades, which left me worried that they might determine my future. In the spring, I cut my shifts to the weekends, only to see my savings depleted in less than 3 months. I struggled like this back and forth, alternating between working full and part-time for 5 years. But on the day I took my final exam, I remember leaving Baruch and stepping out into the full blossom springtime, feeling as dizzy as only a man could feel who has accomplished something monumental. This was in the 90s. The NASDAQ was booming, and commissions that were yet to be reduced by online trading software allowed stockbrokers to make a lot of money. Nothing seemed more exciting than selling stocks on Wall Street. But Wall Street firms were not hiring graduates from government-funded colleges like Baruch. My only option was to settle for second best. I became a stockbroker at Malone and Associates, a medium-sized firm way out on Long Island. The first day I showed up at work, I walked into perhaps a 60 by 100 foot long room where men, all of them under 40, were moving about in an agitated manner and shouting into the phones pressed against their ears. A Latino man in his 50s with a portable shoeshine stand was making his rounds, savagely strooping their shoes with a high shine cloth. These men appeared to be enveloped in arrogance and greed, and they were loving it. In the company of these men, I called as many as 300 prospective clients a day, developing leads, following these leads with recommendations, and turning recommendations into sales. I earned a good salary plus commission and managed to set almost half of my earnings aside. However, my work environment was extremely stressful. Each morning began with a pitch by the firm's manager, James Weissel, pressuring us to sell stocks our company brought public. He walked with a swagger and with his head set forward, giving his figure the prowling and half-crouching posture of a weasel. This, together with his cunning, made others refer to him as a weasel behind his back. One late Friday afternoon, 3 years into my job, I was shutting down my computer and getting ready to leave when the phone rang. And I heard on the other end Weissel's voice. "Dimitri, I need you in my office." Upon entering the office, I saw him sitting behind a desk and looking at a chart with my name on it. "How are you?" he asked in a perfunctory tone, looking above his rimless glasses. "Okay." "I've been reviewing your sales. You haven't been selling many IPOs, initial public offerings, lately." He began drumming the first two fingers of his right hand on the desk as if to say, "And your excuse is?" We had this conversation many times in the past. The IPOs paid our firm a huge commission, sometimes up to 30%. The commission was deducted from the purchase price of a stock, making our clients that much poorer. I tried to stay away from the IPOs as much as I could. Right now, most of my clients are not looking for IPOs. You're part of a team, and your job as a member of the team is to be on board. Unless you start pushing some more IPOs, you may find yourself looking for a job. Do you understand? He asked, peering into my eyes. I understood. I also understood we would never understand each other. "Let me see what I can do," I replied noncommittally. The next month, I recommended the same stocks as before. When Weissel called me into his office, without a preamble, he fired me on the spot. At first, I did not know what to do. The future looked hazy. But once I admitted to myself that my job was intellectually dulling and I was not much more than a glorified car salesman, I didn't feel so bad about being fired. Instead of looking for a similar job somewhere else, I decided to expand my options and obtain an MBA. Over the next 2 weeks, I took 6 practice admission tests from a Barron's guide, and seeing my score improve to slightly above average, I signed up for the actual test. On the day of the test, the clock on the screen, inching toward 0, energized my mind into action the way dopamine energizes the athletes. When at the end of the test I learned about my score, it was much higher than on my best test at home. I mailed my application to 5 different universities in New York State, and after 3 months of anticipation, heard my phone ring. "Can I speak to Dimitri Rozenman?" said a friendly female voice. "This is he." "I'm calling from Cornell University. How are you today?" "Fine," I said cautiously, not knowing what to expect. "I'm pleased to inform you that you've been accepted to Johnson Graduate School of Business." I felt inebriated. "Are you serious?" "Yes," she replied, and then added, "Would you like to receive a loan application with your admittance letter?" "Yes, please." To my ear, the name Cornell had a solemn Anglican cadence that conjured an image of old money and prestige. I mailed the loan application the day after I received it. Another wait, another 2 months spent in anticipation until my loan application was finally approved. And less than a year after I was fired from a loan, having sold my furniture and appliance through a classified ad in the Russian newspaper, I was getting on a Greyhound bus with a suitcase in hand at the Manhattan Port Authority terminal. The road to Ithaca, the home of Cornell, veered off sharply from the highway and then twisted for many miles along the Adirondack River, farmlands, horse pastures, and fields. The university itself was up on a flat-topped hill and was comprised of many 3- and 4-story buildings. Some buildings were made of limestone and gave a sense of grandeur. Others were made of red brick and had a modern appearance. From the top of the hill, I could see an oblong lake that curved away like a boomerang. It seemed quiet and peaceful, as if ruminating in its own silence. At the far end of the hill, a foaming waterfall inside a gorge emptied itself into the stream below. It was summer, and Ithaca truly lived up to its bumper sticker. It was gorgeous. Before I arrived, I made 2 appointments to look at apartments. The first apartment had a bad odor, and the second had a slanted roof that made it look cramped. Dejected, I went inside the bakery to buy something to eat. It was shaped in the form of an L. The sitting area was along the length of the longer line and was facing the street. At the end of the shorter line, there was a bathroom and a payphone. While I was waiting for my order, I saw in the corner an advertisement for an apartment. I tore one of the little fringed tags, made a call from the bakery's payphone, and was given an address to a street that sloped back to the lake. There I was met by a rental agent, who was a tall and skinny young man wearing worn-out jeans. He showed me inside the house where the common hallway smelled of bike tires from the bikes hanging on both sides of the entrance walls. The apartment was up the stairs on the 2nd floor. It was small, but it had everything I needed. A bed, a desk, and an oak chair, plus a small kitchen. A window in the apartment gave a view of the sidewalk with a row of oak trees. It faced east, and, the young man pointed out, allowed in plenty of light. I like this, I told him, and after I signed the lease, he handed me over a key. Having unpacked my suitcase, I decided to step outside. The sun was beginning to set behind the horizon, and the faint breeze from the lake made the leaves rustle. Students were strolling up and down my street, meeting friends and forming kinships. They struck me as different from the ones I met at Baruch. Their clothes were more fashionable, and they had an air of sophistication and self-absorption that appeared to have been groomed into them. In my first year, I had to take a milieu of classes on how to run a large-scale company. To hone team management skills, most projects were assigned to be performed in groups of 4. Maybe because growing up I didn't have siblings, I wasn't much for teamwork. Instead of burning energy on disagreements with other students, I preferred to work by myself. Yet, I liked the predictable passivity of taking classes and learning something new. The passivity came to an abrupt halt in the fall of my 2nd year when one morning I entered the business school's library and saw my fellow students looking in shock at the TV monitor positioned directly behind and above my head. It showed an airplane crashing into one of the twin towers, leaving behind a hideous hole from where heavy smoke was billowing out toward Brooklyn. This was an accident, I told myself. A few minutes later, a 2nd tower got hit. Only then did I realize this was a terrorist attack. The week that followed the winter break was a solitary and surreal one. The students with whom I socialized had left for the holiday, and in the house where I rented my apartment, I was the only one left. The business school's library had a small selection of classics where, to relieve my boredom, I borrowed The Stranger by Camus. I heard it was a great book, only it made me feel worse. In my humorless state, I failed to see anything except a distressing similarity between Meursault and myself. When I finished reading the book, I headed to the library to have it returned. It was a bone-crackling cold outside, and the sky was the color of a tarnished spoon. There was none of that quaint appeal of the summer. I buttoned my coat and began to hurry. By the time I entered the library, I was half running and my breath was loud in my ears. The library was illuminated by fluorescent lights that, by contrast to the gray sky outside, created an inviting appearance. The librarian, a heavy-set woman in her 50s, who was known to be curt, was reading a copy of the Smithsonian. As I was about to hand her the book, she planted a finger under the line she was reading, lifted her eyes, and asked me to put the book on the shelf where it belonged. Save for the librarian, the library was deserted. I browsed around until I came across a book on business strategies that seemed practical and settled by a window to read. One chapter was about a New York-based company that manufactured perfumes with scents similar to brand names and sold them directly to consumers at discount prices. The strategy seemed brazen, even aggressive, but other than that, I did not give it much thought at the time. When I woke up the next morning, the details about the company selling perfumes floated back to me, and I had a sudden realization that the same strategy could be used to market cigars. I had a hunch that brand name cigars could be easily replicated, and a shop selling alternatives to the major brands would do very well in any medium or large city as long as the city has a solid middle class and whether that is conducive for smoking cigars outdoors year-round. I surfed the internet the same day and learned that most imported cigars were made in the Dominican Republic, and most Dominican cigars were made in the town of Santiago in the country's interior. The best way to get there was to fly to Puerto Plata, a resort town on the country's northern shore, and from there to travel by car. On the day of graduation, I didn't attend. A week prior, I booked a seat on a red-eye from JFK to Puerto Plata. Outside the airplane window, I could see the thread of the same expressway that took me to Manhattan when I first landed at JFK 13 years prior. On the tarmac, little airport vehicles raced across the concrete surface, turning and circling like toys. To my left, a swarthy teenage girl with a nose ring sped her thumbs across the screen of a gaming console. To my right, a corpulent man with black-rimmed glasses barely fit into his seat. The plane began to move, slowly turning in a wide arc toward the runway, then trundling forward and lifting itself from the earth into the sky. Before long, two stewardesses began pushing the cart down the aisle, offering soft drinks and peanuts. The corpulent man grabbed a pack of peanuts, tore them open, poured them into the ladle of the palm of his hand, and having jiggled them around like dice, tilted his head slightly and dumped them into his mouth with an annoying smack. Leaning his elbow on the armrest between us, he asked, "Are you going on vacation?" "Actually," and then I told him about my plan to find a cigar manufacturer who could make alternatives to major brands. "What a coincidence," he said, smiling. "I'm also headed to Santiago in search of a factory. I have a good name for a brand. Would you like to see it?" "Sure." He pulled from his soft leather wallet a band with the name Comandante, laid it on the unfolded tray in front of him, and looked at me awaiting my reaction. I thought the name was too long. I also thought it alluded to Fidel Castro, who would have more detractors than admirers. "Can I make a suggestion?" I asked. "Fire away." I covered with my thumb the first 5 letters and saw my companion lapse into thought. Upon the plane landing and taxiing to the gate, I pulled from the overhead compartment my carry-on bag and was about to head straight to customs. "It was nice to meet you," the man said, reaching out for my hand and giving it a hard squeeze that expressed gratitude. A year later, I met him at a cigar show where he stood behind a display showcasing red inferno-colored boxes brand-named Dante. When I stepped outside of the terminal, the air was held in the absolute stillness that presages a beautiful Caribbean day. Old model taxis formed a long line by the curb. The taxi I climbed inside was a Datsun, with jaundiced foam popping out from its upholstery. The driver was a young man who, the moment I buckled myself into the front seat, pressed his foot forcefully onto the gas, revving the engine. His driving was making me carsick, but when I asked him to take it easy, he looked at me as if he could not possibly imagine what I was saying. By the time we reached Santiago, the day had just broken, and people were beginning to appear at the bus stops. At some point, we zoomed past a carcass of an orange dog. It lay flattened in a ditch like a misshapen pizza and seemed to have gotten hit by a passing car or a truck a few days back. To my right and left, stretches of tobacco fields dominated the landscape, and beyond, on the horizon, the tops of the hills were beset in white, smoky mist. At my motel, the woman behind the concierge desk had lovely brown eyes, shiny black hair, and cafe au lait skin. "Can you recommend an English-speaking taxi driver?" I asked. "Sure. For when would you like to make your reservation, sir?" "How about 9 o'clock tomorrow morning? I will have a driver waiting for you at 9 o'clock. In the morning, standing next to the concierge desk, I saw a man in a white Guayabera over cream-colored pants looking at everyone who came down the elevator with a discerning eye. "Hello, I'm Dimitri. Are you my driver?" "Yes," he nodded, and then greeted me with a firm handshake. "My name is Andreas. Happy to meet you." As we distanced away from the city center, tidy homes became replaced by corrugate roof huts connected to a power grid by loosely hung wires, and the road, initially paved in smooth asphalt, dwindled to a track with craters of a size I had seen only before in images of Mars. Over the next 3 days, Andreas took me to around 20 factories. Some were so small they operated out of houses and couldn't expand their capacity even if they wanted to. Some used leaves that had as many spots as on a spotted hyena, and some had owners who named prices that left no room for a profit. On the 4th day, as we were about to pass a field where men armed with machetes were cutting down tobacco stalks, Andreas pulled over to the side of the road, got out, crossed an irrigation ditch, and approached one man who had a bronze face shaded by a straw hat. "Disculpa, señor. ¿Por quién trabajas?" he asked. "Por Tabacalera La Palma," the man replied. "Onde está?" The man pointed to a muddy road that climbed a hill at the far end of the field. On the other side of the hill, we came to a wooden building set back from the road and surrounded on all sides by a field. A sign above the entrance had a bowed palm tree painted next to the name, Tabacalera La Palma. A Labrador-looking dog caked with mud was roaming around, sniffing the land, finding something on it, and wagging its tail. A single chipped step led us inside a lobby where a sign, Oficina, pointed to an outer office where a young woman in a pistachio-colored suit and blue necktie sat behind a desk with a bulky computer screen, clicking her fingers on a keyboard. She lifted her eyes and, after exchanging with Andreas a few words in Spanish, veered around her desk, poked her head into the doorway of the inner office, and then told us in English to proceed inside. "Good day," an athletically built man in his mid-30s, with frank blue eyes, wearing a lime green suit, rose from behind a wide desk to shake my and Andreas's hand. "My name is Jose Blanco. Everyone calls me Jochi. How can I help you?" he asked, speaking in a pleasant drawl over the hum of a fan next to him. "I'm looking for someone to make cigars similar to major brands." "What do you intend to do with them?" Jochi asked. "I'm about to open a store where I want to sell them as alternatives to major brands." "Okay. Would you like me to give you a tour of my factory?" "Sure." Jochi led us to a wide-open room where everything was in different shades of brown. About 300 brown-skinned men sat behind rows of benches and in fluid movements were rolling tobacco leaves into conical shapes, while others were pressing rolled leaves into molds, and yet others were covering the molded leaves with wrappers. I was surprised to see such a busy operation in the hands of a man as young as Jochi. "Have you had this factory for long?" I asked. "Only 2 years. I inherited it from my father." "How are your prices?" "I will make you any size cigar you want for 50 cents. "Can I get terms?" I asked. "Give me 50% up front, and I will give you 30 days on delivery to pay the rest." Although we didn't spend long together, Jochi struck me as a person I could trust, and a friendship was born. The morning after I returned to Ithaca, I made my way to a car dealership down the road from the Greyhound bus stop. A black Toyota Camry parked in the front row had caught my eye. I was never a car person, but I knew that Toyotas were some of the best cars for the money. When I entered the dealership's office, the only person inside was a gray-haired man who was sitting behind a desk with his elbows on the table, lacing his fingers. "Hello, I'm curious about the Toyota Camry outside. How many miles does it have?" I asked. "Only 40,000. It has a salvage title. You can have it for $5,000. Would you like to see it?" he asked in a hoarse voice. "Yes, please." I followed him into the lot where it became apparent that the doors on the driver's side had a slightly different luster than on the rest of the vehicle and had been replaced as a result of a collision. "Don't judge a book by its cover," he said, fishing from the pocket of his jeans a key. "Why don't you take it for a ride?" The car ran rather well, and after we made a deal for $4,500, I drove it off the lot straight to my apartment. There, I tied up all affairs concerning my lease, packed my belongings, and the next day I got on the road in search of a location for my new store. I first hit Atlanta, then New Orleans, Houston, and Dallas. But in every city I visited, I couldn't find a single space that was small enough for a cigar shop, inexpensive, and yet visible. From Dallas, I drove to El Paso, tailing an SUV with the sticker, "I love animals. They are delicious." From El Paso, where I spent the night, the highway skirted Las Cruces and then ran through the desert with only lottery billboards and yellow columns of whirling dust as distractions. Even the radio did not come in until I was in the vicinity of Tucson. When I caught the first sight of Phoenix, the city struck me as nothing to look at. Straight roads, flanked by empty sidewalks, crisscrossed the valley into blocks dominated by gated communities. At certain intersections, these gated communities suddenly stopped, and large lots appeared with signs, "For sale." The only similarity to New York was the air. It had the same warm, dusty, and unpleasant drift as on a platform next to a tunnel in the Manhattan subway. The next morning, on the street called Camelback Road, past a dealership with a sign, "Courtesy Chevrolet," inside a giant arrow, I spotted a store advertised, "For rent." It was deep and narrow and resembled a bowling lane, but it was located only a few feet away from the road and was highly visible. I called the real estate agent and learned that it was priced at $900 a month. I signed the lease the same day. I then ordered a sign, "Cigar Warehouse," to be installed in big red letters above the store's entrance. Shelves from a local carpenter, a humidifier from Sears, cigars from Jochi, and a few major brands from a wholesaler in New York, which I priced nearly at cost to signal low prices across the board. Finally, I called Signorama and asked them to make the A-frame sign, "Lowest cigar prices in town," with an iconic picture of Groucho Marx holding a cigar. Having depleted my savings to $50, I planted the A-frame so it faced the oncoming cars and opened my doors. 2 empty hours went by, during which I was confronted with anxiety that my business concept was doomed to fail. Then someone began to hover at my window and press his face against the glass covered in mist from the humidifier. Unable to see through, the man opened the door and, with his feet pointed outward, penguin-footed inside, swept his eyes across the shelves and asked, "Do you sell retail, or is this just a warehouse?" On my first day, I had only a handful of customers, some undoubtedly intrigued by the mist on my window. But my clientele steadily grew, and 6 months after I opened my doors, I had to install a second register and hire an employee. Within 2 years, I opened 2 more stores, one in a strip mall in a blue-collar neighborhood on the west side of Phoenix, and the other on a trendy promenade in Scottsdale, among boutiques and galleries. Both stores had caught on and soon were turning a profit. Consumed by growing my business, I lacked the time and opportunity to make friends, and the only person with whom I socialized was a woman named Nancy, who I met in my gated community. She was a couple of years older than me, rather plain looking, and had 2 Italian greyhounds with thin, spindly legs. They were the center of her life, and having this center, she needed my attention only sparingly. For more permanent companionship, I bought a Maltese, all white but for the black eyes and nose, and named her Masha, after my mom's best friend, a warm, gregarious woman. Whenever I came home, the dog was so excited and so beside herself. No human being ever made me feel so loved. Her favorite pastime was playing fetch. If I did not feel like playing, she would drop the ball at my feet and look at me insistently until I relented. She was my Pavlov, and I was her dog. One evening, after spending the day at one of my stores, I was driving home and saw off the highway, in place of a seafood restaurant, a new restaurant named Rasputin. Feeling a spark of curiosity, I decided to give it a try. When I entered the restaurant, I saw a stage, and on the stage, a shapely woman in her 30s, shifting foot to foot and singing a beat from Tattoo, running through my head, running through my head. 2 men, hemming her on each side, both with hair below their collarbones, were strumming electric guitars. A floor-to-ceiling mural on one wall, an apparent relic from the seafood restaurant, had 3 bare-breasted mermaids standing upright on their fins. One was clad up to her waist in blue, one in mauve, and the third one in green. Altogether, there were about 15 people in the place, all Russian, loud, and charged up. I followed a trail towards the rear wall, where I sat behind a table for 2. A male voice back of me, in the slurry speech of someone who had too much to drink, was trying to prove to somebody that he did much more for his brother than his brother did for him. I felt like I walked into a disreputable den. "Hello, my name is Yana," a young, blue-eyed waitress with blonde hair, cute dimples, and fair skin introduced herself with a Slavic accent. "Would you like to see the menu?" "Yes, please." After taking in the menu, I ordered galopsi, ground beef cooked inside cabbage leaves. When galopsi arrived, I took one bite and felt some spice unsettling my stomach. A few minutes later, Yana returned, and upon seeing me not eating, looked into my plate. "Something wrong?" "It's too spicy." "Sorry, perhaps I can get you something else?" she asked with a smile that seemed to indicate she was not opposed to having a conversation with me. "If you don't mind me asking," I said, "are you from Russia?" "Actually, I'm from Estonia, but my parents are Russian." "Where in Estonia are you from?" "Tallinn. I've been there as a child. It's a beautiful city." "It is. I miss it so much," she said in a tender voice. "Have you been here long?" I asked. "A year already." "What about friends? Did you make friends yet?" "I mostly keep in touch with my friends back home." "Can I get your number? Perhaps we can go to the movies or out to eat." "Shouldn't I know your name first?" "You're right. My name is Dimitri." She wrote down her number on a torn receipt and said, "Call me," in a sensual voice that stuck in my head like an aphrodisiac. For 4 days, I was tempted to make the call, but feared I would come across as needy. Then I dialed her number. On our first date, I invited Yana to La Petite Fleur, a popular French cafe at the Baltimore Shopping Center. It was evening. The dense, heavy heat of the afternoon had begun to dissipate, and we decided to sit outside, just steps away from the passerby. When Yana took her seat, she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear in a manner that told me she wanted to look appealing to me. Over cookies and pastries, I discovered that Yana had a sweet tooth, and it was a pleasure to watch her. She told me that she was only 18 and lived with her parents and a younger sister, that her mother cleaned houses for a living, that her father was a handyman, and her dream was to go to college and become a doctor. I wasn't taken aback by her age. Quite the contrary, I equated it with innocence. A few days later, we decided to meet again. I was waiting for her in my car outside the gate of the apartment complex where she lived when I saw her open the gate and walk towards me. She was smiling brightly. "Would you like to try Thai food?" I asked. "I've never had Thai food before." "Shall we give it a try then?" All right. At a cleverly named restaurant, Typhoon, we were seated at a table against a wall painted with Asian men and women trading wares from long, narrow boats. In the center of the restaurant, there was a fish tank with a bubbling pirate ship sitting on the gravel bed. Two boys, about 6 years of age, were standing next to it, watching the fish. A waiter dressed in a black suit approached our table and presented the menus with an expressive gallantry. Yana began moving her eyes from item to item, and I saw that she was struggling with the menu. "Would you like me to order for you?" I offered. "Yes, please." I ordered Yana a grilled snapper and for myself rice noodles with fried tofu. Both dishes came sprayed with peanut sauce. There was something about the sauces, made from one of the most common ingredients, that served as a perfect conduit of communication. In the next 2 hours, Yana couldn't stop giggling at the jokes and stories I told, and I had a great time extracting them from my memory. As we were about to leave, she turned serious. "I have something to tell you," she said, reaching her hand across the table. "What's that?" I asked, taking her hand into my own. "My mother is very protective of me. She told me if I'm to date you, she needs to meet you." The next day, when I took Masha for a walk, she spotted the 2 Italian greyhounds sniffing the ground under the community barbecue grill, and with her neck stretched out, began pulling me towards them. "Hi, Masha," Nancy greeted in a voice that pleasant adults greeted children. Then to me, "Hi, stranger." "There is something I need to tell you," I said. "I have a girlfriend now. It would be inappropriate for us to go on a date again." She gave me an unfocused, impersonal smile that seemed to imply that I meant very little to her. A few days later, Yana invited me to meet her mother, Ala, an exceptionally thin woman with a tired look on her face, in the family's apartment. She was dressed in a yellow belted dress, and her only jewelry, other than a wedding ring, was a gold chain with an Orthodox cross. The kitchen, the only room I saw that day, was furnished with an oval table and 3 straight-back chairs. Lace tulle curtains covered the windows. Other than Ala and Yana, only a big gray cat was home, swishing its tail slowly back and forth on the floor. "I have real Russian tea. Would you like some?" Ala asked, gesturing for me to sit down. "Just water, please." She turned on the kitchen faucet, filled a glass with water, and after handing it over to me, sat at the table directly across from me. "I need to speak with you in private," she said, making a scooping motion towards Yana, who took her leave out of the room. "I can see that my daughter likes you very much. When I see her speak with you over the phone, she blooms like a flower." Ala moved her hands apart, mimicking the petals of a blossoming flower. "If you ask people about our family, they will tell you we're a good family. We cherish respect for one another and hard work. My girls are very dear to me, especially Anna. She is my first. I can't have her getting hurt. So I have to ask you, what are your intentions about my daughter?" I was taking a sip at that very moment, with my head bent over the glass, and was caught off guard. "I have serious intentions," I replied, driven by nothing more than a sense or proprietary, because I had yet to think about my intentions. "Good," she nodded and added, "I can see why she likes you." The next time I came over, Iana was home. "I'd like to show you something," she said, leading me into the room she shared with her sister. It had 2 metal beds with canopies from translucent cloth, and in between the beds, a wooden desk with several drawers. Her cat was curled up on one of the beds, taking a siesta. She sat in the middle of the other bed, patted the surface next to her, and said, "Sit next to me." I did. She leaned against me and began shuffling for something in the top drawer of the desk. Her body felt soft, delicate, and pliant. At last she retrieved from the drawer a black and white sketch. At an outstretched arm, it looked like a skull, but when she brought it in close, the teeth transformed themselves into the cars of a train, and in each eye socket, a flying angel appeared. "What do you think?" she asked, looking at me. "It reminds me of Salvador Dali. I drew it myself." "Really?" "You shouldn't be so surprised. I was a straight-A student back home." At this time, a friend of mine from Japan, whom I met at Cornell, invited me to his wedding in Tokyo. I was going to leave Masha at a kennel, but Yana said, "No, let her stay with me." On the morning of my trip, I met Yana in the parking lot of her apartment complex. She was free of makeup, wearing red and white checkered pajama bottoms and a shirt with a giant strawberry. Under her arm, close to her chest, she held her cat. The cat was in heat, making long, plagnant meows. When Masha, in excitement at seeing Yana, came up to her feet, she picked her up with her other arm and brought her also close to her chest, safe distance away from the cat. At that moment, she had this soft, motherly look on her face, and my mind transplanted Yana into a not-too-distant future. I imagined her... You know what I imagined, my dear reader. I imagined her having 2 children, one in each arm, holding both close to her chest. 2 months after I returned from Japan, Yana and I were cuddling on the bed in my apartment. She looked so beautiful in the pool of light coming through the window. I passed my hand down her body until she stilted it at her hip. "I love you," she said, looking at me. "I love you too." I gave her a lingering kiss on the lips, lifting my hand to her waist. "When are we going to get married?" she asked. "Why do you want to rush?" It's so hard. I miss you on the days I don't see you," she said in a sulky, unhappy voice. I don't know if I was in love. As I understand it now, to love someone, you really must know the person. But I was certainly attracted to Yana, and what attracted me most wasn't her looks, kindness, or ambition, although each of these qualities I found important. It was her vulnerability. She was the woman I wanted to protect and make happy for the rest of my life. The next time we were in my apartment, we were sitting on a futon that ever since I purchased it in Phoenix made me feel unmoored. I could fold it and move it into a different apartment on the spur of the moment. "Will you marry me?" I asked, presenting Yana with the sky blue box that said Tiffany's on its lid. I was certain she would immediately say yes. Instead, she slid the ring on her finger, flexed it while looking at the stone for a moment or two, then said, "I will." We exchanged vows on the lawn of a resort hotel in Sedona, a town 2 hours north of Phoenix, surrounded by red clay mountains, drooping abruptly into the valley below. The day's breeze was pleasant and lazy, and the sky a bright blue. Yana, in her elegant white dress, with blonde hair falling in loose curls below her shoulders and only a touch of rouge, looked gorgeous. You know this feeling when you make a decision, but in the back of your mind, you have second thoughts? I did not have this feeling. I felt fortunate to meet this beautiful woman who, just like me, spoke Russian. I imagined we would raise children together who would talk to me in my mother's tongue, and this would endear me to them even more. The wedding itself was in the hotel's clubhouse, which was made to look like a hunting lodge, with trophy heads of deer and elk on the walls. The windows of the clubhouse afforded a view of a gentle brook that formed a small pond of greenish water in the shade of the 3 or 4 poplars. On Yana's side, our guests were her immediate family, her uncle, his wife, their son, and an American family of 5 whom Yana's mother befriended. On my side, we had my half-brother, who traveled from Holland, where he was in college studying languages, and my father, who dressed in a black tuxedo and gripping his silver-knobbed walking stick as if it were a sword, looking regal. My best friend, Alex Stern, who lived in New York, wasn't at the wedding because he couldn't take time off from work. Later, he admitted after visiting me in Phoenix, where he met Yana, he was full of foreboding the marriage was doomed to fail. He just did not know how to tell me. My friend from Japan and his wife couldn't make it because they had a newborn daughter. I only had one friend at my wedding, whom I had known from the days of my early child in Kiev. He arrived from Los Angeles, where he was part owner of a clothing wholesaler. My father asked me to invite 2 of his friends from San Francisco who dealt in Russian jewelry. I never met these men, and all I knew about them was an anecdotal evidence of their shrewdness, but I couldn't refuse my father. They arrived with their wives, who were in their mid-40s. Each had an enameled pendant on their neck and their diamond rings on their fingers. A general indolence emanated from them. When they looked at Yana, it seemed they were confronted with their exuberant youth. Masha was also there. I took her to the grooming salon that morning, and her coat looked especially shiny and fluffy. She was turning around in amazement at so much commotion and appeared to be sensing that her days of sleeping on my bed and arranging herself on the pillow next to mine were probably over. There is an old Russian custom where guests at a wedding, after every toast, shout, "Bitter, bitter." The shouting implies that the vodka is bitter and the newlyweds need to kiss to sweeten its taste. This is how it was at our wedding. Everyone shouted and talked at the top of their voices, and there was a great deal of laughter. Only I noticed Yana's father toasted with an empty glass, and every time a waiter came to fill in his glass, he put up his hand in a gesture of refusal. In between the shouting and kissing, Yana and I danced to the music of the same band that played at the restaurant where we first met. We were very close to each other. Her arms were wrapped around my neck, and I held mine, encircling her back. The only regret I had was not having my mother present. She, out of whom I crawled screaming one Saturday morning, the Sabbath child, she liked to call me. She, who was so beautiful that her high school graduation picture was displayed for years in the Antillaria where that picture was taken. She, from whom as a child I promised to buy jewelry, hoping this would make her happy, a promise I never fulfilled. She, who instilled in me the love for books. She, who was aesthetic to an extreme I couldn't bear to see Misha having one eye. She, who I rarely listened to and whom I left defenseless. She, who called that night and in a voice that sounded like she was being tortured said, I can't bear it any longer. For 2 years before the wedding, hurled herself from the balcony out of the third-floor apartment, which was high enough for her fragile body to ensure instantaneous death.